I wasn't supposed to be there that day. My flight back to Edinburgh had been cancelled, something about a technical fault. The woman at the desk said it like she was reading the ingredients off a cereal box, and so there I was, killing 4 hours in central London with a dead phone battery and a coffee going cold in my hand. I ended up near Kensington, not Buckingham, and people always assume royal things only happen near Buckingham, but grief doesn't confine itself to the grand entrance. It leaks. It finds the side roads. The morning was the kind that London does when it's trying to apologize for itself, cool, soft, the light coming through thin clouds like it wasn't quite sure it had permission to be there. A Tuesday. The pavements were damp from rain that had stopped maybe an hour before, and the air smelled of wet stone and bus, exhaust, and faintly, something like cut flowers from a vendor somewhere down the road. There were people, but not many. A cluster of tourists near the gates, a few of them holding up cameras more out of habit than expectation. Two schoolchildren in matching yellow tabards, their teacher counting heads with the expression of someone who has been counting heads for 23 years and knows it will never get easier. I found a bench. I, for what it's worth, was just sitting, and that's the thing I keep coming back to when I tell this story. I was just sitting, doing nothing, which isn't something I do well, and maybe that's why I noticed. The first car came quietly. Well, no sirens. No outriders, in my opinion, doing that theatrical weaving thing you see on the news. Just a dark car, moving at the pace of something that didn't want to be seen moving at all. Then a second one, which then, and this is what made the tourists lower their cameras one by one, a slow domino of attention, a third. The I think woman next to me on the bench, older, a thermos of something on her knee, said nothing. She just straightened, like her spine recognized something her brain was still catching up to. That's, I think, when I saw William. Not the version of William that exists on the front of a magazine, curated, managed, smile calibrated to the nearest millimeter. This was a different thing entirely. He stepped out of the second car, and for a moment, maybe 3 seconds, maybe less, he stood on the pavement and looked at the building in front of him the way you look at a door you've been dreading opening. He was in a dark coat, no tie. That detail mattered, though I couldn't have told you why, not yet. A man from his detail said something close to his ear. William nodded. Once, the way you nod when someone tells you something you already knew but needed to hear out loud anyway. He didn't, look around, and he didn't do the slight scan that public figures usually do, that unconscious sweep checking for cameras, checking who's watching. He just looked at the door, and I realized then that I was holding my breath. The woman with the thermos had her hand pressed flat against her sternum, without seeming to know she'd put it there. The door opened before he reached it, and then Kate was there. I've tried to describe this part properly, and I keep failing, so I'll just tell you what I saw. She came through the door and she stopped. For a fraction of a moment, she and William looked at each other across maybe 8 feet of damp London pavement, and something passed between them that had no name I can give it. Not a, in my opinion, look you could caption. Not the kind of look that gets written about in the breathless royal coverage that floods your phone every other week. It was the look of two people who have been carrying the same thing, who have gotten so used to carrying it that they've stopped mentioning it, because what would be the point, it's still there either way. That kind of look. She was pale, not photo shoot pale. Pale in the way that your face goes when your body has been doing something hard for a long time and has quietly redistributed its resources. She had a coat on, buttoned to the top, hair that had been done carefully but had been done hours ago. There was a small red mark on the inside of her left wrist, the kind you get from a hospital bracelet worn too long. He crossed the pavement to her. Plus, he didn't say anything that I could see. He just put both hands on her face, very gently, and pressed his forehead to hers. And they stood there, right there on that ordinary damp London pavement, next to a car that cost more than most people's houses, across from a building that would appear in no tourist guidebook, and they just held each other's foreheads together like the whole world had narrowed down to that specific contact between two specific people. One of the tourists lifted a camera. The woman with the thermos turned and looked at the tourist the way the sea looks at a sandcastle. The tourist put the camera down. I don't know actually how long they stood there. It felt basically long, and it felt like exactly the right amount of time. The kind of moment that has its own internal clock that has nothing to do with the one on your phone. Basically, then Kate laughed. It came out of nowhere or not nowhere, but from somewhere so deep and ragged that it arrived at the surface sounding almost like crying. And William pulled back and he looked at her, and then he laughed too, and it was such a human sound, such a stripped-down, exhausted, ridiculous sound of two people who have no defenses left and have found something absurd in the rubble. I'd no idea what was funny. It didn't matter. The woman with the thermos was crying, and she made no noise about it, just let the tears do what they wanted, her face tilted toward the thin London light. I think I was too, a little. In the undignified way where you don't realize until you taste salt. William took Kate's hand. He laced his fingers through hers with the practiced ease of someone who has done this 10,000 times and has not once taken it for granted. They turned, and they went back inside. Pretty much, the door closed. The street returned to itself, tourists, yellow tauberds, the sound of a bus somewhere. Ordinary. Completely ordinary. The woman beside me screwed the cap back on her thermos. 38 years married, she said, to no one in particular. Or maybe to me, and I still can't do that with my husband in public without feeling self-conscious. She stood up. Good for them, she said, like a verdict. And she walked away, and I sat there with my cold coffee, and the light kept doing its uncertain thing through the clouds, and I thought about how grief and love and exhaustion can live in a human face all at the same time, right out in the open on a Tuesday, and no one calls the cameras, and no one announces it, and it just happens. It just happens, and then the street swallows it whole. Like it was never there. Part 2 continues. Right arrow. His name was Corporal Davies, though I didn't know that then. I found it out later, the way you find things out in the internet age, which is to say someone who'd been standing 30 feet further down the pavement than me had also been filming, for different reasons entirely, and their video caught what mine missed, and eventually someone in the comments wrote his name in that very specific way that people who actually know a person write a name. Not like a headline which like they're putting it down carefully, but I'm getting ahead. At the time he was just a shape, because that's how the guard works, right, and the whole architecture of it's designed to turn a man into a symbol. The bearskin does the head, which the coat does the body. The stillness does the rest. I guess you stop seeing person. You see post. He was positioned to the left of the secondary entrance, maybe 20 feet from where William and Kate had their moment on the pavement. Close enough to see everything. Trained, I've since read, to remain present but absent, visible but invisible, a breathing piece of the furniture of state. He had been standing there for 2 hours and 40 minutes by that point, according to someone who spoke to his unit afterward. He didn't move during any of it. Not when the cars arrived, not when Kate came through the door, not when they stood forehead to forehead on the pavement, not when the tourist lifted the camera and put it away again. He stood the way he had been taught to stand, which is to say, completely. The moment that started everything was small. Kate and William had gone back inside. The detail had followed. The cars were still at the curb, engines off. The street had given its little collective exhale and started to reassemble itself around normality. And I mean, then a little girl came out of the gathered tourists. She was maybe 5, 6 at an outside estimate. Red coat, white tights, one shoe that had its Velcro undone, because apparently 5-year-olds in London have the same relationship to Velcro fasteners as 5-year-olds everywhere. She had been holding her mother's hand, and then she hadn't been. The way small children subtract themselves from safety so efficiently it should be studied scientifically. She walked straight up to the guard. Her mother made the sound that mothers make when they see this happening, a specific intake of breath that is part horror and part resignation. She started moving forward, but there were people between her and her daughter now, the small clot of tourists shifting and shuffling. The girl stopped directly in front of him. She tilted her head back to look up at the bearskin. "Why are you sad?" she said, clear as a bell, loud enough that the people nearest to them heard it. One man turned with his phone out, old instinct, and then seemed to think better of it. The guard didn't respond. The girl wasn't fazed. She put her hands on her hips, which is a posture that belongs entirely to small children and veteran diplomats. "I can honestly tell," she informed him. "Plus, my nanny's face does that." Her mother reached her then, crouching down, murmuring something, beginning the gentle archaeology of extracting a small person from a situation without making it worse. But the girl wasn't looking at her mother. She was still looking at him. And here's the thing, here's the part that the video caught, and that I saw, and that the woman who'd been to my left gasped softly at. He blinked, one long, slow blink, not regulation, not the controlled, scheduled blink of a man maintaining eye moisture within defined parameters, a human blink, the kind that happens when something hits you somewhere that your training didn't reach. That was all, but the little girl with the iron certainty of the very young nodded once, like actually he'd told her something she'd suspected. She reached into the pocket of her red coat and produced a slightly battered Haribo gummy bear, orange, which everyone knows is the correct one, and placed it on the ground right at his feet. "That's for TBH, you," she said, which very serious. "For when you're done." Her mother got her up and away, apologizing to the air behind her with the fluency of someone who does this regularly. The tourists settled back to their business. A pigeon investigated the Haribo for 3.5 seconds and then made a decision against it. The guard remained still, but I watched his jaw, in my opinion just the jaw. Something worked there, which some small tectonic thing, deep under the surface, the kind of movement that only registers if you're looking at the right part of a face at the right moment. I've thought about it a lot since, about what it's to hold that much stillness as a professional obligation, to have feelings move through you like weather through a house with all the windows locked, to be a witness to the private grief of people whose grief is technically public property, and to be neither in nor out of it. To stand in the exact seam between the official and the human, and to be cracked, not broken, but cracked, by a 5-year-old in a red coat who could read sadness in a face that was professionally expressionless. The video ended up online later that evening. Not because of anything that happened next. Nothing dramatic happened next. It ended up online because someone had been recording the guard from a distance when the girl walked up. Had kept recording, and later when they watched it back they saw what no one had been close enough to see in the moment. In the bottom right corner of the frame, very small, William, standing at a window on the ground floor of the building behind the guard, looking out. He had been there the whole time. He watched the girl place the gummy bear. He watched the guard's jaw work, and he stood at that window with his forehead resting very lightly against the glass, the way you rest your forehead against something cool and solid when you need to borrow its steadiness. Then he stepped back from the glass, and was gone. The comments under the video were, well, they were the internet, most of them, but buried in the middle of them, quiet, was someone who simply wrote, "The weight they carry doesn't get lighter just because they carry it well." No username, no profile picture, and posted once, replied to never. I think about that sentence more than I'd like to admit. Part 3 continues. Right arrow. I told this story once at a dinner, a few months after it happened. Not a grand dinner. My friend Priya's kitchen table, 4 of us, someone's leftover rice going around for the second time, that kind of dinner. I told it badly. The way you tell things live that you've been telling better in your head, stumbling over the timeline, skipping the woman with the thermos entirely, forgetting to mention the little girl until I'd already moved past the part where she mattered. Priya stopped me. "The gummy bear," she said. "Tell that part again." So I did, and she sat back in her chair and was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "That's the whole thing, isn't it? That's, well, the whole story." I think she was right. Though look, I'm not sure I understood in what direction. Here's what I know about that day at the level of confirmed fact, the stuff. That isn't interpretation or projection or the slightly unreliable romanticism of a person who was there. Kate had come from an appointment. Not a public one, nothing that appeared on any schedule, any court circular, any of those crisp little official documents that account for the hours of royal lives in measured, tasteful increments. A private appointment. The kind that gets listed nowhere and means everything. William had come separately. Different car, different route. They had coordinated arrival, according to the detail, to within a 4-minute window. This coordination, the logistical choreography of two people ensuring they'd be in the same place at the right time, was organized by someone else, some aide or secretary, and it takes a specific kind of life to require that level of administration around a private grief. They were inside for just over 2 hours. When they came actually out again, the second time together, which I almost missed because my rescheduled flight was leaving in 90 minutes and I'd started the calculation of whether I could stay, they were different. Not better, which not resolved. Nothing so simple and different the way the sky is different after a storm passes. Well, still the same sky. Everything still present. Plus, but the light has shifted and the pressure has changed and the air is doing something new. Kate had her sunglasses on. She walks differently with sunglasses, most people do, that faint borrowed armor of them, but the hand holding William's was the same as it had been on the way in. The fingers were in the same places. He hadn't let her rework through and she hadn't renavigated. They'd, for what it's worth, just kept the hold. Pretty much I noticed that. The continuity, in my opinion, of the grip, it is such a small thing to notice. There was a man outside the building who had been there when I arrived and was still there on his feet. The whole time, kind of near the entrance but not of it, the particular standing still of someone who's waiting without quite admitting they're waiting. Silver-haired. Coat that had been expensive once, and he was holding a flat cap in both hands in front of him, turning it in a slow circle, around and around, the way your hands do when your mind is somewhere else entirely. When Kate came out, she stopped when she saw him. Something crossed her face. Multiple things, one after another, rapid and unguarded, in a way that faces only move when the owner has run out of reserves for management. Then she walked over to him. He said something. She nodded, and he said something else, and she tilted her head and looked at the sky briefly, that upward look people do when they're trying to keep something from falling, and then she looked back at him and said something that made his hands go still on the cap. He nodded, once. The same nod that William had given the man from his detail, hours earlier, the nod of something already known, received again. Then she put her arms around him and just for a moment, brief. She patted his basically back twice, the way you do with someone older, someone who might shatter a little if you held on too long. He didn't shatter, but he pressed his lips together very hard. William, who had been speaking to someone near the car, looked over and saw this. He watched it happen. His face did the thing where it doesn't do anything. That very specific blankness that men who have learned to carry grief in public without performing it have developed, not absence of feeling, but the deliberate smoothing of it, like a bed being made in a house that has a long day ahead of it. Then the silver-haired man stepped back, nodded to Kate, nodded to William from a distance, settled his cap on his head with both hands, the practiced motion of a ritual, and walked away. I didn't know who he was, and I still don't. And that might be the right ending to that part of it. Some grief belongs to its people and no one else. And the not knowing is the appropriate response of a stranger on a bench who happened to be grounded by a canceled flight on a soft gray Tuesday. Kate and William got into the car together. Not separate cars. Plus, together, the door closed, and the small convoy moved off with the same quiet purposefulness with which it had arrived, not fast, not urgent, but directional. Kind of going somewhere. Still going somewhere. The guard changed at some point during this. The replacement came. The transition happened with its precise ceremony, and the original guard, Corporal Davies, marched away. As he cleared the corner, as he went around it and out of public sight, he bent down very briefly, just for a second, and when he came back up, the orange gummy bear was in his hand. The person who told me this was a woman who'd been photographing the changing of the guard as part of a photography project on formal ritual, and who'd been there long enough to see the whole sequence of the day, and who mentioned it to me afterward because she'd seen me sitting on the bench with the cold coffee and had assumed I was the kind of person who might want to know. Well, she was right. I've thought about that gummy bear more than is probably rational, about where it went. Plus, whether kind of he ate it, kept it, put it somewhere. Whether, for what it's worth, a 5-year-old in a red coat ever found out that she cracked something in a man who had been trained against cracking. Whether Kate, in the back of that car, rested her head on William's shoulder or looked out the window or held his hand, or did something else entirely that no camera caught because some moments earn their privacy? I don't know. But here's what I think the whole thing adds up to: the cars and the forehead to forehead, and the woman's thermos, and the little girl, and the stranger with the silver hair, and the guard going around the corner. There's a kind of farewell that isn't goodbye. It's not the ending of a thing. Plus, it's the moment when you look at something hard, really look at it, and then you close the door on it for the day, not because it's over, but because you have to keep moving, because the car is waiting and the next thing is waiting and the body keeps its appointments even when the heart has no interest in the schedule. That's what I think I saw that Tuesday. Basically, a farewell to something. A coming back from something, two people who have, by some combination of circumstance and choice and sheer accumulated years, learned to grieve together in the brief available moments when the world is looking somewhere else. And the world for once mostly was. My flight left at 6:42. Plus, I'd a window seat. The clouds over London from above were the same thin, uncertain kind they'd been from below. I watched them for a while and thought about how light moves through things that have no intention of letting it pass and does anyway and end.